Hey internets, it is time for my quarterly questions and answers session. We are at Q2 2026 right now. The way this works is I look at questions from public subscribers in the comments to any one of my videos, and I try to give you guys some answers. But I also give Subscribe Star members and channel members first dibs because it's only fair because they're helping me pay the bills. However, anybody's question can potentially end up in one of these videos. So if you are subscribed to me and you ask a question in the comment section of any video pretty much, you may end up showing up here. And again, it is public subscribers, which by the way is a free thing to be. You don't pay any money for that. Also, I do not do any kind of sponsorships or deals for QA videos, even though they tend to be longer than my usual videos, because I mean, it's just a QA video. That would be just kind of silly in my opinion. But if you want to support me and get something cool in return, I'm putting my Taxation is Theft hat on sale for a little bit. This is actually a really good hat. The text is embroidered, really good quality, which is probably why it's one of the more popular items I sell. Anyway, I'll just get right into things, starting with the Subscribe Star questions. And let's begin with this one from Autistic Goat. Question: with the recent Republican strategy talk on whether to blow it up or to punish the base, or to try to primary the few bad ones, quote unquote, is this a good point for libertarians to just point out that this is a clear flaw with democracy? I mean, yes, it is, because it is a very clear flaw with democracy. Because the very basic issue here is that because voters are very irrational, it's very, very difficult in a democracy to actually punish bad politicians. There's very little we can actually do. I mean, sure, we can try to primary away the bad ones, but the thing is, voter cattle are going to vote for whatever the TV tell them to vote for anyway. Or they'll just vote based on party line, making it more of a team sports game so that way they can avoid actually understanding which politicians have been lying and which ones have been lying less. I mean, they all lie, but of course there is such thing as the lesser evil. And what's nice is that we can kind of empirically point to evidence that this is how it is. I mean, you can just point to someone like Chuck Schumer, who has been in office for years, decades, despite tons of scandals showing that he doesn't actually believe a single word coming out of his own mouth. And yet the voter cattle vote for him anyway. That's an important point in addition to everything in the myth of the rational voter, is that it's also been very much empirically proven. And then, of course, there's just the fallacy of assuming that the non-productive class can function beneficially so long as we just get the quote-unquote correct people in charge of the non-productive class. And that hasn't really worked either, which then bleeds kind of into Hoppe's criticism of democracy and the reasons given for why monarchy is actually better than democracy. Both are bad, but monarchy actually gives you a slightly higher chance of getting a decent person in the position of the non-productive class. It's not good, and absolutely a monarch can effectively be a dictator, but it is kind of the basic reason given. And as for punishing the base, I assume you're talking about kind of the Nick Fuentes and the Groypers are gonna punish the Republican base, how they were talking in their own strategy of voting for the Democrats to punish Trump for what they see as Israel first measures. And I mean, the issue with that is that even if they do vote for the Democrats and the Democrats win, nothing's gonna really change there. I mean, maybe the Republican politicians will learn, but probably not. With the issue here being that the very nature of the non-productive class that politicians make up is a system that just makes it so it's really hard to hold these people responsible for anything anyways, because they're not financially held liable for the crap that they do. Next question. Hey Mantis, is there an active Discord for your community? I have seen one linked several times, but every link I click has expired. Thank you for all you do. So yeah, that's just kind of an issue with Discord. I tell it to generate a permanent link and it doesn't always keep it permanent. But what I do is I try to keep the one in my link tree updated. And I'm actually answering this question for everyone, not just the person asking this question. So if you're trying to get into the Discord and you're having difficulty doing so, check my link tree. You should be able to get in that way. Next question. Hey Mentis, I recently became a Hoppian thanks to your videos earlier this year. Congratulations. The one question I have about a Hoppianism is, how would a justice system work in a Hoppian society? What I haven't figured out yet is what would uphold the NAP? How would lawsuits and lawsuit winnings be decided? How would criminal justice be handled? Okay, the long answer to that, it would be to read the privatization of defense and as well as the mechanisms of freedom. But the short answer is really this. ANCAP theory, at the end of the day, when you look at it from the standpoint of explaining a model for society to live by, is effectively a refutation. Specifically, it is a refutation of the idea of the free rider problem and a refutation of the claim that you need a compulsory funding system for the free rider problem. And if you're not familiar with that problem, it's essentially the claim that non-excludable goods will not get funded because a free rider doesn't really really have any incentive to fund them, since once somebody else has funded them, they can't be excluded from it. For example, a streetlight, once it is funded, everyone driving on the street benefits from it, and thus nobody has the incentive to fund it, and thus even though everybody wants streetlights, they would end up getting underfunded because people's private, selfish interest is to not pay for them and just hope that somebody else will pay for them. And the libertarian reputation of this is to point out that rather than forcing everybody to pay for it, or in other words, resolving the free rider problem with taxation, what we should do instead is to take those things that are non-excludable and find ways to make them excludable. And there's a couple ways to do that. One is to make the society itself entirely excludable via private borders and defense contracts. This is one of the big reasons I'll often call myself a Hoppian libertarian, even though I don't fully agree with Hoppa on everything. The whole private city model is the easiest way to resolve it. Example I like to give for since defense would be, see in the future, there exists some large space colony society. And how this society would work is it would require people to pay to live in this space colony. And that payment would fund the quote-unquote commons for that society, which would include something like a laser defense array to defend the colony against asteroids or space pirates or whatever. And the main thing that will often come up is, okay, how's that different from the state? And the answer is that it's voluntary. It's non-compulsory. You only pay the membership if you actually want to live there, which then incentivizes the owner of this space colony to actually make it a decent colony that people want to live in. So that's probably the simplest way to solve it. And in the modern day, not in the future, when we're able to make giant Death Star space colonies or whatever, one example would be something like a cruise ship. Cruise ships also have things like outdoor lighting along the walkways, which are just obviously paid for by the fact that you have to pay to get on the cruise ship in the first place. And they operate in a similar way as a private city on the water. And then of course, security for the ship is handled by the same payment. Now, outside of the private city model, the other alternative answer is that it can be resolved by making it excludable by making everything a insurance system. So for example, having mutual aid societies that everybody chooses to be a part of as a form of social safety net, or even as a quote-unquote nation by consent. And the membership fee also includes funding the commons, which of course can also include defense contracts and a private security, etc., etc. What I just said is a massive oversimplification. It is actually much more complicated than that. It's obviously way more complicated than that. This is probably the question that gets asked to us extreme libertarians the most often, and the TLDR of it is to make everything exclusive to some degree. But also, some free riding is actually acceptable. For example, children are free riders, and we're okay with them being free riders. That's because parents have an incentive to take care of the children. And an interesting thing that happens with human psychology is that when you make society as a whole exclusive, there's some pretty good evidence that that actually increases social trust, and thus makes people more interested in taking care of each other, and so thus there's a bit more lenience. Next question. From Grass Farmer, what do you think of Zulu's remnant strategy regarding libertarianism? I mean, there's some good things about it and some bad things about it. The main problem I have with it is that there's no way to actually know that you're the remnant. Because as a strategy, and I'm going to answer this question specifically as a strategy because you said strategy there, I'll just ignore the philosophy for a moment because philosophically they're mostly spot on. As a strategy, I'm not fully on board with it because I just don't see how it's any different from accelerationism. I mean, I get it. The whole idea of things like, oh, we're going to allow crack addicts to be on public school grounds because it's a public school, which is the state, which therefore isn't legitimately owned. And so if we allow crack addicts there, not only are we giving the correct libertarian principled position, but also it will make parents want to disassociate themselves from the public school system and pull their kids out of it and be more amicable to a charter school system. So in other words, giving crazy sounding positions, not because you actually think that they would be good for society, but because they're principled, and it will make people move away from state systems by making state systems more ridiculous. There's some truth to it, and I could see it potentially working. The problem is actually getting there is almost impossible. There's no way, no how you're actually going to convince parents to actually vote for that and to actually allow that to happen on public schools. What they're going to do instead is just view libertarians as insane and thus remove any kind of libertarians from the school board. And thus the public school system will continue to be more and more socialist and more terrible. And I've seen this also called the collapsitarian mindset, the try and make the state as inefficient as possible so that it will collapse and hope that Ancapistan will just arise from the ashes. Which brings the next problem, which is that you don't really have any guarantee that that's actually going to happen. What usually happens instead when you have the ashes is the remnant just ends up being whoever has the biggest stick at the time. And that's the person who shapes the next society. And so I think the slow privatization and take over everything is just a better strategy. The only annoying thing about it is that yes, it does require us libertarians to engage in some lesser evilism where we take a less bad option over a very bad option. But it's important for people to understand that that's not actually pragmatic, it's just dealing with reality. If you've got 5 choices and they all suck, you go with the one that sucks least. That doesn't mean you're saying it doesn't suck. That doesn't mean that you're denying the potential of a 6th option that would exist if the structure of the system we live under wasn't so darn corrupt. So it doesn't mean you're going against your principles. It just means that you're willing to engage with reality. And that's the problem I have with the remnant strategy, is that sometimes it can very often come across as trying to just engage only with libertarian philosophy and not engage with real people. Who, by the way, real people, the average person, is never going to understand our reasons behind why we would say something like this from a philosophical standpoint. The average person is not ever going to become a philosopher, the people will not just. However, I will say that I have nothing against them, and I do agree with most of what those on the Remnant podcast are saying. It's just as a strategy, I have some misgivings with it. I'm not totally sold on it. Next question from Caffeine Nicotine. Have you considered doing a more general video designed specifically as an introduction to lib-right philosophy and cater to those coming from a more consequentialist point of view? I mean, in a way, Friedmanites kind of already do that. We'd purposely designed to be linked and would help humanize us to someone who doesn't understand our basic philosophical framework of negative rights, freedom of association, etc., etc. I mean, yeah, as I just said in the previous question, everyone will not just. Everyone's not going to just become a philosopher one day and recognize the reasons why libertarians occasionally suggest things that sound insane. They're just gonna look at the scary sounding insane proposition, ignore the deeper reasoning behind it, and then they just disassociate themselves from libertarianism even further. It is something I could do. I have a lot of videos in my backlog of videos to do though, and I try to go back and forth between doing a lib-right theory video and doing a cultural video to kind of outreach to the normies, as well as current event videos, and then just general philosophy videos. But the Friedmanite take is something I could go a bit more into, because that is an interesting thing about Ancapistan, is that consequentially, once we actually get there, it is also a more prosperous society. It's not just a more ethical society in the context of natural rights and natural law theory. That is indeed an effective angle to use for the normies. Next question. From Jorik, I am seeing a few people on the right talking about how mass immigration and late-stage feminism are all a byproduct of capitalism. Sargon and his team. Is that what they're saying? I thought Sargon was a bit more free market than that. Even if there are other contributing factors, would like to hear your thoughts on this maybe in a Q&A at some point. Well, guess what, Jorik? Your question is showing up in a Q&A video. That is what happens when you message me with a question on Subscribestar. It gets into these videos. Anyway, seriously though, to answer your question, a common problem I see with the statist right is they make a similar mistake that the left makes, but in a different way, which is a tendency to blame problems caused by Gibbs-Meatats on other things. For instance, feminism specifically could have been a good libertarian adjacent philosophy if it focused on natural rights for women, but of course it did not. What feminism does instead is it vies for a bunch of statist laws and statist entitlements, or in other words, the standard civil rights grift of demanding that the state step in and fix any unequal outcomes. And thus feminist ideology is effectively just gender socialism. It's just having the state force men and women to have equal outcomes, reasons for why those outcomes exist be darned. And that's just obviously not capitalism. Capitalism is not when the state forcibly extracts wealth and then gives it to a different population group, which is the same problem with immigration. Because at the end of the day, people choose where to live based on 2 major factors: the best they can possibly get out of society based on what they can afford, and cultural similarity. People in general want to live nearby others like themselves. And the issue with third world immigration is that we incentivize people who are very much not like those currently living in Western societies or East Asian societies, because they're also first world. We incentivize people who are just not a cultural fit to move into those societies anyways by basically offering them free stuff. Come here, we'll take care of you, we'll just allow you to have access to our social safety net, we'll take care of your children, we'll give them access to free, better education than they could ever possibly get from elsewhere. And in the case of the US, even though I know he mentioned Sargon, so probably talking about the UK, in the US we also have the additional problem of, oh, okay, you've had an anchor baby here, now you can just funnel infinite welfare through that anchor baby. That's actually why the statistics on regards to how much welfare immigrants use is actually much higher than reported. Because if they come in here, have a child, they can then funnel welfare through that child, and statistically that'll just be viewed as welfare used by a US citizen, which of course is dishonest. But really the issue is just having a welfare system without any kind of quid pro. Just come here and we'll toss elderly people out of their apartments and give immigrants those apartments for free. Just no strings attached. You just come here and you get free stuff. And when that happens, you just encourage degeneracy. It doesn't make people behave better in the country. If anything, it's just inviting the barbarians into the gates. And I've noticed that the statist right doesn't like to look at it from that standpoint because a lot of them they're not really ready to accept the fact that state welfare systems are a failure. And I think those of us on the libertarian right, instead of the statist right, should be pointing that out more often. Just kind of calling out the issue with the welfare hypocrisy. Anyway, moving on to channel members. We'll start with this one from Ludwig Williams 9153. Not related to the video, but I have 2 questions for the next Q&A video. So screenshot just and keep it on standby. Guess I'll just answer the first one. I considered asking you your general thoughts or critiques on Christian ethics, but then I realized that would be the philosophical equivalent of asking you to untangle a web of Christmas lights the size of Mount Everest. Yes, it would be. So for the sake of simplicity, what are your critiques, if any, of the 10 Commandments and 9 Beatitudes? Well, I won't go into those specifically because even going over the 10 Commandments and the Beatitudes, I mean, that would also be at least a 10-minute video by itself. But I will put it this way, there is a reason, a very good reason why certain religions have survived to the modern day for hundreds, if not thousands of years. And that is because religion does a very good job of explaining base morality to the normies in a way that they can understand it. It is a lot easier for a person to understand that stealing is wrong when it's presented in a spiritual bucket than it is to actually get them to understand why a society that has stealing allowed in it would not be sustainable. Easy for someone who is philosophically minded to understand it from that angle. But when you start talking about time and sustainability and how certain ethics and virtues are interconnected with each other, that create certain incentives that produce certain outcomes, eventually you just kind of lose the ear of the normie. So instead, you explain it to them in a way of, oh, it's spiritually good to do this. There's this kind of essence of morality that everyone can intuitively connect with, even if they don't understand it. And the religions that tend to survive for multiple generations are the ones that tend to preach good virtues. Not always, not all the time. But in the case of the Christianity, the 10 Commandments, all of them are effectively based on things that you need for society to survive. The Beatitudes may be a little bit different because the Beatitudes are things that are generally bad when presented outside of society, but are good to have within society because they build public trust. For instance, blessed are the meek. I mean, within society, close-knit family, sure, but not so much outside of that. You need public trust for that to be true. In fact, you need a lot of public trust for that to be true. Otherwise, you just get crushed by the Nietzscheans. Anyways, next question. What do you think of other libertarian channels such as Lord Killian? Well, there's a lot of other libertarian channels out there. So I'm just going to answer it as if you asked, what do I think of Lord Killian? I mean, honestly, mostly overall, he does some good content. I admittedly have not watched all of his videos. I've watched a few though. My only issues with him from what I've seen is that he kind of has the same tabula rasa beliefs as some of the left has. Like for instance saying, oh, being against immigration is bad because that's racist. And that is just not a good argument for immigration. Zulu puts forth much better arguments for open borders, which I still disagree with, by the way, but for different reasons. Perhaps I should do a follow-up on why I'm still against open borders. I mean, the TLDR of it is that the left doesn't actually want open borders, and thus if libertarians were to support open borders, we wouldn't actually get open borders, because what leftists really want is global hegemony, but I'll get more into that later. But other than that, Lord Killian's pretty good. For example, his coverage on the Suno lawsuit was a video I did recently see, and he does do a pretty good job of explaining the insanity of it, and how the presence of AI and what it does is just causing IP laws to crash into a puddle of insanity. And these non-productive record labels are just doing everything they can to claw onto power, even if they're doubling down on a system that clearly isn't working. And so they're just trying to bury Suno with a bunch of bogus lawsuits, when in reality those lawsuits are just making their position come to the light as more and more obviously, as I said before, non-productive. Anyways, next question. What is your stance on the online age verification stuff going around, like the laws in California, Colorado, and the law proposed in the House? To be more clear, where is it wrong in libertarian ethics and where is it okay? Is the big problem with the state enforcing it? Well, I mean, the issue is that it's really just the meme of terrible parents wanting to step in and be the parent for their child that they don't want to deal with. Because age verification is something that the private market has kind of already provided a pretty good solution for. The only problem with those systems is that they are software that requires the parent to actually install the software on their children's devices. Or in the cases when the software is already installed, learn how to use it and turn it on. And saying that we should justify the existence of the the state just because some parents don't want to learn the basics of technology, it comes across as just deeply ridiculous to me. Which effectively really is what it is, because if you're familiar with technology, if you're not tech illiterate, then you know that state-required OS root level age verification is an absolutely insane violation of privacy. It is a terrible idea. Seeing it go as far as them even saying that, yeah, sure, the CIA should have a root level backdoor to Linux. It's one of the most ridiculous examples of bootlicking I've ever seen. Next question. Are you dating LSDK? No, that whole Discord rumor about me having a trans wife is fake. I just don't really put any effort to refuting it because I kind of don't care and kind of find it funny. Because here's the thing, this might just but this might be a weird way of looking at it, but the way I see it is that if you are a content creator that has over 50,000 subscribers or something, you're gonna have people making up drama. And I personally see it as kind of a humorous badge of honor when the drama that comes out about you is entirely fake. I just find that funny. When the people who want to start crap about you need to just make stuff up that isn't true at all, I think that's actually a sign that you're doing something right. It means that I have successfully avoided enough drama that the drama-starved drama monkeys are forced to come up with nonsense in its steam. But just kidding. Okay, my actual question is, are the tech bro Silicon Valley billionaires the only libertarians we have that can do semi-effective praxis towards a Hoppian society? Examples include things like network states, CEO-run private cities, etc. I mean, currently, yes, kind of. And that's just simply because they have money to get things done. That doesn't mean that they're good, because I mean, one thing that the far left does have correct is that billionaires are to some degree a little bit corrupt. It's almost impossible to be a billionaire in today's society without taking advantage of some kind of taxpayer subsidized system. But that being said, it's better than the alternative. There are reasons why before I became more of a libertarian right, I was more of what you could call a tech anarchist libertarian, because tech will ultimately be what paves our way to freedom. And Elon Musk, for example, has definitely done a much better job with Twitter than Jack Dorsey did. And so if we can get tech bros on the side of the libertarian right, that is for the most part a very big win. And yes, that can eventually lead towards them actually starting up some kind of private city experiment and having that be run and showing people that yes, this system can not only work, but it's actually much better than the current system would be pretty good. The only downside to it is that you need a government that will actually be okay with such an experiment being run, which of course isn't the fault of the tech bros, but it is something you have to consider. Next question. I'm American. Who should I vote for? There are two viable voting strategies. One is just give the Libertarian Party a vote, even though a lot of times the Libertarian Party are just left prags. The left prags are coming back, unfortunately. In case anybody's wondering, and this should basically really come as no surprise to anyone, I'm more on the side of the LPNH in the recent fiasco that has been happening. But you can throw them a vote anyway just to give your middle finger to the two-party system, because really the Democrats and Republicans are not that much better than each other. But the alternative strategy to that is just lesser evil voting. Vote for the least bad option, but make it clear that you're just voting for them because they're the least bad option. Don't actually support them. Do not actually endorse them. And this is a strategy that I've been taking for quite a while, and it's what I did with Donald Trump and Kamala. Some of you may remember I pointed out a lot of reasons why Trump would be better than Kamala, but I didn't actually say that he would be the savior of the West. I said he would be the lesser of two evils. That doesn't make Trump good, that just means that Kamala was that bad. Next question. Post this on your old QA, but I'll repost it here. I know that this is probably on your video backlogs, but do you have a good argument I can use for the British India famine argument that gets brought up whenever a Marxist is trying to deny genocide? I usually just think that they are falsely equivocating capitalism with mercantilism, but wanted your opinion on the matter. I'm assuming you mean the World War II famine, so the Indian famine of 1943. I'm not sure if that's what you mean, but I'm just gonna go ahead and assume that's the famine you're referring to. And yeah, that is really the issue. It's actually worse than what you're saying. It's not so much that they're falsely equivocating capitalism with mercantilism, but rather they're not even really attempting to identify or analyze what the difference is between capitalism and other systems entirely at all. It's the same kind of nonsense I just recently took up with Jackson Hinkle, in how they don't actually attempt any way to understand the difference between capitalism and communism. And their argument is effectively, oh, it's the Chinese Communist Party and flashy city lights with futuristic robots, therefore communism is when flashy city with futuristic robots. Which of course is ridiculous, because there's really no such thing, again, as I've said in that video, there's no such thing as a capitalist country or a communist country. That is an oversimplification, because those are economic policies, and so there is such thing as a capitalist system and capitalist policy, and as well as there being a communist system and communist policy, and you have to actually analyze those things based on the policy and what it does. You can't just say that, oh, this country calls themselves X, and X happened, therefore everything X fault. And that's effectively effectively the silly whataboutism to quoque system that they're going for when they say British India famine. And they're just saying that, oh, British capitalism, colonialism, famine happened, therefore capitalism also causes famines just like communism does, therefore you can't use the Holodomor or the Chinese Great Famine as criticism of communism. And that's pretty much the argument the commies are making. And the thing is, it's really just not an honest argument. And they're just trying to waste your time by making you explain why there's a causal link between one and not a causal link between the other. I think a simple, quick way to do it would just be pointing out that what it is just an ecological fallacy. Saying that capitalism caused this thing too, because the country calls itself capitalism, that doesn't actually tell you if capitalism actually caused the thing. But really, it's just a stupid argument to waste your time. Because historians have analyzed all of the commie famines in all of their glory, and the reasons why the cause of those famines can be directly traced to communist policy have already been explained in exhaustive detail. And so when a communist makes this argument, they're just not only committing that ecological fallacy, but they're also just trying to force you to engage with their denial of basic history, which all tankies basically do, to be honest. Many tanky arguments eventually boil down to call any fact that has been recorded by a Western historian to be capitalist propaganda simply by virtue of the fact that it came from a Western historian, which is stupid because we can actually look at the reasons those historians gave and clearly see how the reasoning checks out and how farm collectivization directly incentivizes people to not actually care for their farms. That's what the commie is ultimately trying to deny. They're just trying to avoid talking about incentives because that always ends up proving them wrong. Next question. Have you seen Lavender's video on you? Yes, I did. If so, what did you think of it, since he pretty much says you don't understand the labor theory of value? I actually just didn't understand why he needed to make the video about me, because ultimately he doesn't like the labor theory of value. He's not defending it. He's just going more in depth into what Marx specifically says, as opposed to neo-Marxists today, who are effectively just trash libs who believe in a heavy welfare state. And the thing is, my original video, all of my videos are designed to kind of be a introductory to intermediate video, and they're designed to get people to look more into things. Now, yes, the actual labor theory of value as Marx explains it is a bit different, but the funny thing is that he actually contradicts himself on what his labor theory of value really is in his second and third volume, and I noticed that Lavender said he hadn't read those yet. So it'll be interesting if Lavender reads through those and comes to the realization that, yes, actually I was right in saying that Karl Marx is committing personal incredulity, because to be honest, Marx doesn't even understand his own theory, because he changes his ideas in regards to what labor time actually is and whether or not it actually matters in the market later on, because the thing is, the ultimate refutation of the labor theory of value, it's not so much what I gave in that video, because again, the video really is just made to show the problem with the whole idea of surplus labor value in the way that people like the Gravel Institute put it, or people like Hassan put it. But the more complete refutation of Marx is just pointing to time preferences, but also pointing to homesteading. Marx ultimately doesn't understand that what the worker is really doing is not so much being exploited by an owner class, but rather he is trading in the time it would take him to create his own means of production. But of course, it's also a lot more complicated than that, because to be honest, Marx is kind of incoherent. And I think Lavender missed an opportunity with that. I think what he should have done is he should have read all 3 volumes and then just done a longer video on the labor theory of value just on his own. There's no need to respond to my video when you're ultimately in the end agreeing with me that the labor theory of value is bad. It seemed a little nitpicky to me. If I were to respond to it, I wouldn't actually respond very much to Lavender's video. I would just make a long form video going more in depth into the labor theory of value. Next question. How would the private cities of Hoperica deal with large natural areas, i.e. parks? I mean, well, you can have privatized parks. Or to put it more intelligently, oh no, the NCAPs are gonna turn Yellowstone into a giant geothermal power plant. So environmentalism, you actually asked a question that would require a massive video, because ultimately some degree of environmentalism does in fact fall under the NAP. For example, let's say some mad scientist could invent a device that could suck out all of the oxygen out of the air, and then they started renting out the oxygen to the planet. That would absolutely violate the NAP, because it's not valid homesteading of the oxygen. People are already using oxygen in their property, and by taking it away, you're negatively affecting the property of everybody else. So because not all resources are infinite, there is therefore some degree of quote-unquote the commons that people have an implied right to using because they're kind of already using it. And this then can of course be applied to less obvious things than somebody taking all of the oxygen. Say somebody makes a water dam, and they don't get permission to make that water dam from all of the other people that are utilizing the water in on that river or stream or whatever. Well, guess what? Because those people were already utilizing that resource by drastically reducing that resource, that therefore can be argued to violate the NAP. And then we move that to things like someone invents a device that will cut down all of the trees instantly and instantly pack all of the trees on Earth into neat little bundles to be processed into wood. The thing is, that could also be argued to violate the NAP, because that's going to negatively affect the Earth's climate in a way that will severely impact everybody else's property on the planet without their permission. You've damaged other people's property without their permission. And so yes, if somebody did try to do any of those things, a self-defense action against them by, say, a private security force would actually be reasonable. That would actually fall within libertarian ethics. And those, of course, are just the mad scientist examples. Now, what you're asking is something a bit more specific, though. Natural parks. Well, knowing that somebody can't just completely destroy all of the forests, one of the things that solves for this is, in fact, privatization of parks. People often ask the question, okay, well, we need the government to own this park to keep it beautiful, but what if the government doesn't do that? It's always under the assumption that the state isn't going to destroy what they own, because of course collective ownership isn't real. It's just a bureaucrat calling the shots instead. The state has historically destroyed the environment just as much as what they accuse an alleged lib-right society that we supposedly would do. But the reality is you absolutely can privatize a park. It probably wouldn't be massive, huge parks anymore, so probably not all of Yellowstone, but instead what would most likely happen is multiple different agencies homesteading different parts of the park and having it be an attraction. Anyway, next question. This one from Denny Cat. Why do you always conflate empiricism with what Liquid Zulu calls nominalism sensualism? Empiricism does not mean that deduction is invalid or that one cannot make generalizations. Rothbard was an empiricist and admitted that he mainly uses the term a priori to distance himself from modern empiricism. Nominalism and sensualism, nothing presents an empiricist from making a generalization that men are on average far less dangerous than bears. I mean, I don't always do that, but when I do, I'm only doing that because it's what a lot of the leftists do. A lot of the far left likes to pretend that the evidence empirically is always on their side, and they do that by pretending that any kind of rational deduction is invalid, as you say, which is effectively just a grift to say that, oh, there isn't evidence of A, therefore unless you can cite me a specific study that shows A, then I'm going to pretend that A doesn't exist. That's really what I'm calling out. I'm aware that you technically can be an empiricist and not do that, but the problem is with what we actually see in academia today, especially when they get into sensualism and metaphysics, because what I see a lot of them do, and you'll see this with the whole social construct argument, is they'll pretend that because it cannot be perceived by the senses, then it doesn't matter. It's kind of the opposite of the reification, where you're treating something that is not literally real as concretely real. Well, there's also the problem that just because something isn't concretely real, that also doesn't mean that it doesn't matter and cannot be used. Hopefully that's not too confusing. Next question from Maximus Prime. How would you be able to trust the systems of other free cities that they won't be slaveries? And also, if they were, how would we deal with them? So one thing that I think of when I think of this question, because I've thought of this one myself, is it comes to the question of, does knowingly dealing in stolen goods violate the NAP? For instance, if your neighbor steals from your other neighbor and then tries to sell you that neighbor's goods, are you participating in the violation of that other neighbor's rights when you know that they're selling you the goods of the other neighbor? Basically, is it still theft if the can has been kicked down the line? And I would say to some degree, yes. Because the thing is, if you know that that property does not actually belong to the person selling it to you, and you buy it, then you are buying it knowing full well that that's not a valid transfer of property. Which means that if the true owner of that property makes a claim against you, then that means that you should have to give it back to them. Which means it's a really bad idea to trade in stolen property. And so in a society that has slavery, and they produce their goods through slavery, the fact is the true owner of part of that sale does go to the people who have been wrongfully enslaved. So if you trade with them, you have to know that if they can make a claim against you, then that claim is valid, and therefore you are assisting in violating their rights. So in other words, how you would deal with them is that it actually does become reasonable to have some degree of embargoes. This is something I've said before against communist countries in defense of the embargoes. It actually does, to some degree, even from a libertarian philosophy standpoint, make sense to embargo a communist country for this very reason. Next question, which is now getting into the regular public subscriber questions. Starting with X-Flight Enjoyer, do you think libertarians should start using YIMBYism as their main platform because it is one of the clearest examples of government making the cost of living higher and people's lives worse? I mean, yeah, that's one thing that anybody in the liberty movement should be calling out more often. I think there's a few big issues that could actually use more focus. There's the healthcare system and how patents make it artificially more expensive. There's the statist involuntary welfare system and how it encourages degeneracy. And then there is indeed that. Housing restrictions and zoning laws that basically make it so that you can't have houses. It's honestly one of the biggest examples of regulatory capture, because a lot of times the companies who are behind the housing market, who treat it as an investment market, can also be seen pushing NIMBYism laws behind the scenes as well. And as a result of that, the state makes it so that housing never meets the demand. It is definitely a problem, and it can be called out more often. Next question. What is in your personal EDC bag pack? I guess you mean everyday carry. Honestly, these days, nothing, because I'm kind of too chronically ill to really go out that much. Yeah, it sucks. Sucks a whole lot. I don't like it. However, before coming down with that, my everyday carry was a laptop, one night's worth of clothes, and I plead the fifth for the rest. Yep, that's right. I'm actually not sure if anything I actually had was illegal at all, but I'd rather just not list it all, just in case, and plead the fifth. There you go. Next question from Tom Collinsworth 2384. Would you ever consider doing a video on the Confederacy? I know there's a lot of libertarian thinkers like myself who defend it. I mean, maybe. It's not so much that the Confederacy was good, they weren't, because slavery is definitely not good. However, the issue is that Abraham Lincoln gets far more praise than he deserves. He really wasn't that good of a president. There were better ways to deal with slavery, far better ways actually, than allowing the Civil War to happen. Abe Lincoln's legacy is honestly one of the worst examples of outcome bias fallacy, where people look back at it and say, oh well, things turned out okay-ish in the end, even though hundreds of thousands of people died, but hey, it was one of the first modern industrialized wars and that helped us somehow, and it's all kind of silly. Because every time people think like that, it always brings up the question, okay, compared to what? What if we just let slavery naturally die, because it would, because it's not actually profitable, and then industrialized for a better reason than just killing each other? I mean, it's almost just a silly question when you put it that way. So yeah, I'll give that one a maybe. Maybe I'll do a video on it. I add that to the pile. I mean, I have a lot of videos in the pile, to be honest. I have so many just 1/4 done videos you guys would not believe. It's kind of bad, to be honest. Next question from Jaden Lloyd Maldives 6789. Do you agree that the Groypers act more like the far left or they don't? Yes and no. They do in some ways. There's a big difference between the far left and the Groypers though, which is that the Groypers understand that equality isn't real. And when you understand that, that immediately changes everything behind how you interpret reality, along with a completely different epistemology altogether. The issue where they falter and are similar to the left is that a lot of the Groyper types, well, they kind of fall for the same neo-Marxist scam, but they don't fall for it culturally, they fall for it economically. That's actually one of the biggest threats of our times right now, actually, is members of the statist right becoming more left economically. Because it's easier to blame all of your problems on capitalism rather than actually learning how our economic systems actually work. And instead they'll focus on a few cringy things done by Zionists, and then they'll use that to say that, oh, we can't have a free market, when in reality what they're doing isn't even free market, unless you think that free market is when politicians take bribes, which is in fact a leftist talking point that Groypers do indeed tend to fall for. But one thing I don't think we have to worry about is them actually going as far as to join the far left, because their dislike of the market just comes from a point of not trusting the people currently in our institutions, which is actually correct. You shouldn't trust them because a lot of them are terrible people, but they just think that that's part of the free market when it actually isn't. Whereas leftist contention with the free market comes almost entirely from their equity fallacy and equality fallacy mindset. And Groypers do not share that mindset, so yes, there's similarities, but I found it's a lot easier to show a Groyper why they're wrong on the free market than it is to show a leftist why they're wrong on the free market. Because a Groyper, all they really need to understand in order to be back on board with libertarians when it comes to the economy is that they just need to understand that regulatory capture generally comes in increasing the government rather than reducing the government. And thus the fact that what they're complaining about isn't actually the free market at all becomes kind of obvious to them. Whereas leftists, even if you explain that to them, they're still going to be butthurt from their false care-harm neo-Marxist philosophy and meta-ethical systems of thinking that equality is the ultimate good. And that's much harder to deprogram. Hope that makes sense. Next question. How would you think the scientific sector, along with STEM, would be affected in a Hoppian libertarian society? They would flourish way better than they currently do. Because here's the thing, the regulations, the way they currently work, I mean, one thing I should point out is that in a more libertarian society, it doesn't mean no rules, it just means that the rules are initially based based on the NAP, and anything beyond that is physical removal. And what that means is that you absolutely can set up a society with rules that are amicable to scientific experimentation and progress. So for instance, you could have something like a private city of industry, but for Silicon Valley, if we're talking computer science, or alternatively pretty much the exact same thing for any other field of research you can imagine. And as for how do sociocultural factors affect libertarianism, I mean, that just kind of depends on which cultural factor you're talking about. The main benefit of culture, anyway, is that shared culture increases public trust and also gives people a sense of morality and belonging that the NAP alone doesn't always provide. But again, it depends on which cultural value you're talking about. Next question. What's your thoughts on the land value tax? I think it would be better form than income, sales, and property taxes and could be a reasonable stepping stone in decreasing the size of bureaucracy. Yes, it is a better taxation system. Doesn't mean it's good, but it is better. The problem is actually getting there, because one obvious issue that comes up with this that a lot of libertarians point out, and I've kind of pointed out before, is that one issue we have right now, at least with the United States government, is that you'll have, for example, Trump. Trump will float ideas about reducing taxes, or float the idea of getting rid of the income tax, but then his administration will go off and do just as much deficit spending as Biden did, and then not actually get rid of the income tax. Because ultimately what needs to happen is that any kind of reduction in taxes needs to also come with a reduction in government spending, or else you just get inflation, which is just effectively an indirect form of taxation that is just as bad, if not worse. The Georgists do have their point, though, when they point out the fact that owning land is kind of a monopoly if you have a really pedantic definition of monopoly and define it as a monopoly over a specific space, then yes, technically ownership of that specific space is a monopoly of that specific space. I don't really agree with that definition because there's more land than just any specific space you can name. I mean, you could just as easily walk into KFC and point to somebody's bowl of Kentucky Fried Chicken and say, oh, that person has a monopoly over the specific bowl of chicken that they're eating. I mean, yeah, sure, technically, but of course, with that definition of monopoly in the lexicon, it's at that point just kind of entirely arbitrary, to the point where the word itself might as well just have the exact same definition as quote-unquote exclusivity. That's just another reason why monopoly is best defined as a lack of viable or reasonable alternatives, rather than a monopoly of the specific thing. But I do at least get where they're coming from. If you take land in a state and you want to be a minarchist, then yes, that specific piece of land is a monopoly over that specific piece of land. And when the government is only allowed to tax just the value of that land, then their options are to either stay as a minarchist state or have those taxes be completely ridiculous. So in my opinion, just the hot take is that I think Georgism could work, but it wouldn't work eternally. It would eventually become corrupt and fail, because ultimately you would still have a non-productive class in charge of that price, or deciding what the value of the land is. Next question. Were you a contributor to Deep Freeze back in the day? Oh boy. Yeah, this is gonna be a fun one. Technically, no, nothing on Deep Freeze is actually from me. But before I took on the name Mentiswave for myself, before I started my channel, I was what you could call a meme smith. In fact, there's a good chance you may have shared memes made by me without even knowing it. But as far as Deep Freeze goes, probably the closest thing I came to being part of that is I was active during Gamergate, just obviously not as Mentiswave, but I was active in trying to attempt to, at least, talk some sense into the loony bins. For instance, I was one of the people who attempted to talk some sense into the Wikipedia mods, which technically everyone's a Wikipedia mod, but I mean the actual top editors. For instance, I tried to talk some sense into Red Pen of Doom, and quickly realized that he was just an ideologically motivated imbecile. He had absolutely no interest whatsoever in whether or not what he was supporting was true. None whatsoever. It was actually very pathetic. Because ultimately, on the truth-deciding side of Gamergate, it was a completely circular screw-up. The article on Wikipedia, at least, really does just effectively read, journos did nothing wrong. Anybody who says that the journos did something wrong is a misogynist, evil person, super racist, blah, 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 blah. You know the whole deal with these people. And then the source for that was the very journos who were being accused of doing something wrong. It's just one of the most ridiculously obvious conflicts of interest in reporting that has ever existed. And for me, it wasn't too surprising because it wasn't my first rodeo. I've seen the media do this kind of thing before, but it was a particularly outrageous example because it was just so obviously stupid to any rational person. Anyone with the IQ of a banana tree could deduce that there maybe, just maybe, might be something wrong with using the word of the journalists who are being accused of lying as the reliable source trademark to be used as evidence for figuring out whether or not those journalists were lying. Your Honor, my client did nothing wrong, therefore he is not guilty. What is your evidence for this, sir? Well, you see, my client says so, and my client is listed right here in this arbitrary list of reliable sources. So there's no need to look at any of the evidence. Case closed. Client did nothing wrong, not guilty. Case nicest missed. And so I definitely also saw with some of the younger people involved in Gamergate that it was indeed their first radio, and was just a nice initial red pill on just how dishonest and willing to engage in the most utterly insane mental gymnastics some people can be in order to defend whatever ridiculous worldview they're trying to defend. Next question. What is this game? Oh yeah, I'm just adding this here because I often get this question all the time. And the answer is whenever I'm doing a gamer rant video, whenever it's one of my videos that has game footage in the background, I always include the name of the game in the description below. And yes, I know that mobile YouTube doesn't necessarily make it as easy as PC YouTube to view that description, and it's especially bad on Android TV, but just know that it is always there. I even tend to include what I'm doing, such as what game mode it is, whether it's PvP or whatever. But yeah, I always try to include that in the description below. I will probably still get asked this question all the time, but that is okay. It is what it is. But at least those of you who are listening in right now and have listened to the video this far, if you ever wondered what game I'm playing, now you know. It is in the description of the video. Next question. What are you AI generating, Blood? Well, I don't really AI generate much. I do occasionally use it on this channel. And here's the thing about my use of AI and some other people's use of AI that you may not know. Because what I'm about to point out here is something very irritating that you run in when you start becoming a content creator. And that is the issue of intellectual property rights and the especially annoying hurdles that creates when it comes to creating content on the internet that your real identity is somewhat tied to. People will make copyright claims for the absolute most ridiculous reasons. For instance, record labels will copyright claim a video that's 2 hours long from somebody else because it has 3 seconds of some song that they own in the background in a way that you can barely hear it. I mean, they actually hire third worlders in India or something to listen to every video and go through things manually and manually file copyright claims. They're really, really disgusting about it. And the thing is, the same thing can also happen for images, just not as often. And there isn't as much content ID for it. But what I do is that if I can't find an image that can be argued to be fair use that represents a certain thing, that's when I will try to AI generate an image that represents what I'm talking about. That's it. I use AI for memes to get around intellectual property rights laws. No, seriously, that's why I do it. Not joking. That is 100% the reason. I'm very sad to say that that is pretty much the main reason to use it. It is entirely because I don't want to accidentally use some image from a Shutterstock or whatever, and then have my video disingenuously claimed by some non-productive mooch, who is really just taking advantage of how bad our IP laws are, purely just so that they can earn a buck. And so occasionally generating some things with AI to get around that is one way that we small content creators can just kind of give them the middle finger. And I mean, occasionally it's fun to post an actual AI meme just for the sake of AI memes, because AI does do a relatively good job of generating memes, but the big reason for it really is just IP. Next question. I bought both of the Fumo hats months ago before this thought experiment existed. What does that say about my moral character? And this is in response to the red blue button video. I mean, it just says that you like Fumo hats, and therefore you are based. That is pretty much it. Although I will admit the Fumo hats are a little silly. Admittedly, it's kind of a meme that I made them. But they are good quality. They are actually sewn on like a real Fumo eye. Although, admittedly, for me at least, I just let my wife wear the ones that I have. Because they're a little silly, a little bit on the overly cutesy side, and so they do look better when a girl wears it. Next question, from Lizard May B. Wyvern. Mentiswave, are you secretly a praying mantis in a skin suit? Yes, actually, I am indeed secretly a praying mantis in a skin suit. You guys all thought that you were listening to a human all of this time, but in fact, I am an alien praying mantis from Alpha Centauri, and I have come to this planet to enlighten humanity and help you all get over the religion of statism. Yeah, sorry if this is coming out a little bit weird. I know it's kind of odd to have disclosure just kind of randomly in a QA video about 2/3 the way through, but those of you listening, now you know. Next question. Oh, okay, so this one. I decided to do this one, even though it's not really a question to me. One guy says, your debate with Jackson Hinkle made me a communist. His claims actually convinced me to stop being a librarian and stop being a fan your channel. I have switched to watching him instead of you now. And then President Checkmate asks him, I question why you felt the need to say as much here. The answer is very simple, because this guy is a communist and he's a liar. He did not actually watch my content. He was not a libertarian in the least. And you can find this out by simply just clicking on his account and checking putting out his videos. Because the interesting thing about communists is that they're just outright liars, but they're also often not very good liars. It's pretty easy to expose them. And in the case of this guy, you can find him reposting a video of Richard D. Wolff, a very well-known socialist and contributor to the Gravel Institute. And this was posted 7 years ago, before my channel even existed. So this guy's not actually a libertarian turned communist or a librarian, as he writes. He is just a liar. He probably didn't even watch my response to Jackson Hinkle, as suggested by the fact that he didn't even say anything that was relevant to the response. And this is just an important thing for people to remember. Tankies are just inherently disingenuous people. This is another thing I wish everybody understood about communism, aside from just all the economic issues. These are people who are effectively married to their ideology, and they have no interest in objective truth. In fact, often they have an epistemology where they outright reject objective truth. They don't believe that facts are facts, they don't believe that reality is real, and so in their mind, they don't see anything wrong with just outright saying things that are not true. They think that if they can lie for the sake of the collective or for the sake of the commune, then that lie becomes true in their mindset. That is another thing to keep in mind whenever you're reading something from these people. Because what's interesting about this is that not only is he lying, but he's lying about something that's really stupid. I mean, like President Checkmate asks, I question why you felt the need to say as much here. It just doesn't even matter even if it was true. And yet he lies about it anyway. That's just how these people are. Next question. Is this about Sabrina Carpenter from Scammer7751 on the video of bimbo feminism? I mean, yes and no. The video is not really about her specifically. It's just that she's a really good example of the logical conclusions that bimbo feminism finds it in. Because Sabrina Carpenter obviously is not a philosopher or even a thought leader or really anything to any real degree, other than just celebrity NPC number 462. Rather, she's just a perfect example to point to where you can easily show what feminism has become. How it's not only no longer really about women's rights, not even in the civil rights sense, but rather feminism has kind of become just a form of gender collectivism, where they don't actually even believe in anything, they're just trying to maximize whatever their collective group wants without any kind of rhyme or reason behind it. It has become kind of an empty ideology, you could say. You look behind the mask of what they're saying and you find out that there's just nothing there, which is an interesting thing because it shows how feminist rhetoric has evolved to be more or less just an excuse for any kind of behavior that a woman may want to engage in without actually having to take responsibility for the consequences of their actions. And then they randomly sprinkle in some misandry for good measure. I'm actually thinking of doing a follow-up video to this to pointing out why it is that so many Indian engagements bait scammers use feminism as the ideology that they pretend to have, because it's an empty ideology. But the establishment still takes it seriously anyway, even though they've stopped actually believing anything, which then allows rage bait grifters to come in and just wear that ideology as a mask in order to be as insufferable as possible to generate negative engagement. Next question. From Mario 1997, how would you replace or modify taxes to no longer be theft? I mean, the very nature of taxes by the definition of taxation is that it's a mandatory financial charge levied on citizens in order for the state to fund itself. And the only way to change that to not be theft would be getting rid of the mandatory part. It would be making the society itself a voluntary society, and thus people can avoid any fees of it by just choosing to not be a part of that society. Just like how if you don't want to be a part of a nightclub, you just stop paying your membership fee or something. Not so much with the state, you can't really do that. And so thus replacing taxes so that it's not theft really just means that you make those services that the state provides currently to be services that are being provided by the market instead. And thus people voluntarily pay for them in order to have access to those services. That's it. That's really all you do to make taxes no longer theft, is you make them kind of no longer taxes. I mean, there are some other weird ways to do it that are a little bit less conventional. For instance, one idea I saw, I don't really recall where I heard or saw this idea before, but I saw someone come up with a crypto state, sort of hypothetical society, where a community runs itself as kind of a night watchman state, but they also have their own cryptocurrency to live in that community. In order to live in that community, you have to use that specific crypto coin. And as this night watchman state generates those crypto coins, it first uses coins generated to pay the people in charge of the night watchman services. In other words, when new coins are generated on the blockchain, they have it set up so that it automatically does that to some degree, and a portion of those coins are automatically paid out to the judges, the police, etc., etc. The problem, of course, is that would be inflation to the moon. So why would you even want to be a part of a society that does that? And it could very, very easily turn corrupt with how those coins are being managed by that night watchman state. It'll pretty much collapse the second they screw up. which would probably be pretty quickly. But who knows, something like that could kind of work. It's basically a crypto version of MMT though, and it has a lot of the same flaws. Next question. Is it just me or pretty much every single one of our modern problems have their origin in the 1960s? I mean, yes and no. A lot of our problems really have our origins in deep-rooted philosophical questions that even existed back in ancient Greece and ancient Rome, but our institutional problems, however, at the very least, yes, most of those are rooted into 1960s, and that's simply because the way our institutions that as they currently operate were shaped were all kind of shaped through World War II, because that is the neoliberal establishment's origin story. That is the last time the cards fell, as you could put it, and so a lot of our institutions are just kind of tied everlastingly to the locations of where those cards fell. And that's why it seems like a lot of our systems still have a bit of the flaws that happened around World War II, just kind of internally baked into them in ways that we just can't get rid of. Because most of them still draw the justifications for what they believe in and why they do things the way that they do things from that specific time period and those events. And while not all of it is bad, the main issue really just comes down to the civil rights egalitarian mindset. Because Hitler was very much not a good dude. That's one thing those of us on the libertarian right should point out, you know, in opposition to the statist right or the authoritarian right, or really just in this case, the edgy Wignot right, that Hitler was very much a twat and a lot of what he said was insane and a lot of what he did was evil. However, one thing that Hitler was correct about is that egalitarianism isn't real. Equality is not a thing. He was wrong in his reasons and how he came to those conclusions, and he was wrong in what he did about it, but he was right about the thing itself in a very strict sense of the word. And a lot of our institutions, mainly our intellectual institutions or academia to be specific, post-World War II, they just kind of universally went against everything he said, and thus the mantra quickly became that anybody who denied the new holy church of equality, anybody who went against that new dogma, well, you're just literally bad mustache man. And you're just wrong because the guy who lost the war that is our origin story believed this, and therefore it was wrong, and that's pretty much how the cards are. And really what we're seeing nowadays is we're just kind of seeing that one specific thing that was wrong start to crack open. People are starting to realize that, hey, equality isn't real, and using the state to try and force it will actually just make things worse, and more evidence is coming to light about the consequences that have come as a result of our institutions being wrong about this. Hopefully it'll resolve reasonably though. Hopefully it won't result in another world war, and I think that's one avenue where libertarians and the liberty movement can come in and show that there's a better path, where you can in fact be against equality without being against freedom. And in fact, they were never contradictory to begin with. Next question. I've never heard of neo-Marxism. What is it? I mean, essentially it's just Marxist ideas of class consciousness applied to modern culture. Some of it's rooted in the Frankfurt School, as many have pointed out, but really it's just another word for modern progressivism and its marriage to collectivism and socialist economics. That's essentially what it is. Pretty simple and straightforward. Next question. From Hero the Wanderer in response to the Why Steam Isn't a Real Monopoly video. Asking again if it's a bad service issue, again in response to Steam service, then why isn't there also an issue with the banking system in general? And the answer to that is very simple and very sad. It's because the banking system is currently controlled by the ruling elite, whereas Steam is an entirely private company. It has not gone public, and thus the ruling elite aren't able to directly control it. That's it. The whole litigation against Steam, as I said in that video, is almost certainly just lawfare. They don't actually believe in anything they're saying in the allegations against Steam. It's just psychopaths and decadent elites who are mad that they don't currently control it. The fact that many other systems we have are far more guilty of what they're accusing Steam of doing, that doesn't matter because they don't actually believe it. The whole, it's a monopoly, oh, it's raising prices for consumers, oh, it's bad for developers, all of those are just nonsense reasons they give to the normies. It's just disingenuous politics. People who are doing things for bad reasons and know that they're doing things for bad reasons, well, obviously they can't tell you the truth of the reasons behind what they are doing, because I mean, what are they going to say? Are politicians honestly going to say that we want this corporation to be regulated purely so that we can have a piece of the pie? No, of course not. They're never going to admit that. Liars always need to invent bogus reasons that sound more justified. It's pretty much just standard operating procedure for them. Next question. This one's from An Ordinary Aurora, and this is another question that requires the context, and it's in response to my video on why libertarians ignoring culture wars is bad strategy. And he says, I agree. I guess he's saying he agrees with my claim that it's bad strategy. But can you please make theory videos at the same time time anyways? And the answer is yes, I will still do theory videos, they just won't be every single one of my videos. I'm definitely not stopping on the theory videos I've already done. Those will absolutely not be the only theory videos I do. Again, I just kind of like to rotate things out a bit, because the purpose of my channel, when I originally started it, yes, a big purpose of it was refuting communism and kind of acting as an apologist for the free market and libertarian ideas, but also a big reason behind my channel is that I'm not just a libertarian channel. A big reason I started my channel is because I saw a lot of lies being pushed by the establishment and a lot of people falling for those lies, and I didn't believe that people were doing a good enough job refuting those lies. In fact, the moment I finally made my channel was really just the moment I kind of broke and just couldn't take it anymore, because political and philosophical discussion at the time was just really, really terrible. It was effectively, back then when I first started, being almost entirely dominated by bread tubers who were just parroting the woke ideology of the cathedral and acting like that was somehow anti-establishment. And so I just kind of felt the need almost to step in and explain from a bit more good faith standpoint why what they're saying wasn't correct. And what is wrong and what is incorrect and what the establishment is pushing, well, it changes from time to time. And right now we're in kind of a weird lull where political discussion is kind of dumb right now, simply because of Trump. You have an insane amount of leftists who hate everything that Trump wants because it comes from Trump, and then you have a lot of standard conservatives who want whatever Trump wants because it comes from Trump. And you just can't reason with either side. But yeah, to answer your question, I'm still going to be making theory videos. In fact, I should probably aim to finish the one I've been doing on collective conspiracy theories lately. That seems like one that just kind of needs to be finished. I said I would do it a couple months ago. It's kind of in response to what the Groypers had to say about my JQ video. Probably time to do that one. Anyway, next question. Where would you go to start learning about actual libertarianism? I think having a solid starting point to springboard people into the movement would do wonders for the movement as a whole. I think if you want something that is professional and to the point, I believe I've mentioned this before, but the Mises Institute does have their own channel, Mises Media, and it does do a very good job breaking down libertarian concepts in ways that are a little bit more digestible to people who don't want to see the more edgy gamer-related content that I do, or the really long streams from people like Liquid Zulu or Fabian Liberty, where they stream for 5 hours or something, whereas Mises Media has it more in digestible 10 to 50 minute chunks. It's much more direct and straight and to the point. And then of course their website, if you don't know this by the way, if you've watched my channel, which I assume everybody who's watching this QA video, if you've watched this QA video up to this point in the video, you almost certainly have noticed that I often use Mises Institute as a source. If you didn't already know, another important fact is that the Mises Institute, being a far libertarian right institute, an Austrian economic think tank, well, as you may know, we're not really big fans of IP. And so because of that, the Mises Institute actually has a lot of freely downloadable ebooks. They're just there. There's no DRM on them whatsoever, that are from a lot of Austrian economic thinkers. So for instance, Rothbard, Hoppe, Mises himself, a lot of the books are just available on the Mises Institute for free. You just search for the book name and they just have it. You can just download it and you can just read it on your tablet whenever. So yeah, next question. From THVJ, can you make videos talking about every major conspiracy theory? Every single one? No. But I'll probably make videos about additional conspiracy theories if those conspiracy theories are something that I believe is gaining more traction than it deserves. For instance, one video I was going to make a long time ago but kind of decided against was the QAnon video. And the reason is because nobody cares about QAnon anymore. It's a conspiracy theory that only a very small corner of the internet still follows and still believes in. And it doesn't really bleed out from those areas of the internet anymore. So yeah, I could still make a video about Q, but I think there's just kind of no point anymore. Because that's another thing you may have noticed about my channel. I don't churn out videos. I'm not trying to make a video about every little thing in order to get whatever ad revenue or sell whatever. I don't actually really care so much about the money. As much as I like money, because everybody needs it. But I don't want to be another one of those grifters that just spams content all day, even if it's low quality content that only a few people care about, just to get some clicks. I'd rather stick to quality over quantity, if you know what I mean. Next question. 500K or dinner with Jay-Z? I wouldn't even go to dinner with Jay-Z over $500. I really do not care. So yeah, I definitely take the 500K. Plus, it's really hard for me to go out anyways these days. Next question. From Beh802, seems like you've uploaded a lot of videos recently. Are you feeling better? Is your condition stabilizing? I'm feeling a little better because I'm doing a therapy that is supposed to target the problem of what is causing my chronic illness. However, it is a annoyingly slow recovery, but yes, I am getting some recovery done, but I'm still not entirely good yet. You'll know when I'm good because I will start a podcast when I am. Or at the very least, I'll return to doing podcasts on other channels. Those of you who've been subscribed to me for a while, you may remember roughly a year and a half ago, I would actually do live appearances. But that just kind of got a little bit too difficult, which sucks a lot, but it is what it is. But thanks for asking though. Next question from Writing Weeb, and this is in response to the male loneliness crisis video. I am 29 and I made my first female friend last year. Congratulations, not always easy these days. All the years before, I just didn't meet any women at the places I went because all of my interests are 99% male. The question being, how would I get female friends when every place I go has no women in it? So those you don't know, I am a married man. I actually met my wife at work. However, important thing to point out, we didn't actually start dating until after we had both left that job, which was over 13 years ago. And one of the things I've known just from her interests, because the places she goes are places that there are more women, I will be honest, even for women who are a little bit unusual on the female side, the reality is female interests tend to lean more towards what we would consider to be quote-unquote normie interests. So in other words, the places you go to find more women, and it's important you go there to have fun for yourself, not just to meet women, you got to make sure you're having fun, is you kind of have to broaden your horizons. And yes, I know that that is a cheesy statement, but it is kind of true in this case. You have to try some new activities that you originally considered normie. Think of a normie activity that would most interest you and try doing that activity. Like even if it's just a jogging through the woods group, that's something that is normie. It is also generally good for your health, but also you'll probably see some women in that group. But yeah, these days it's hard simply because they consider you a creep for simply breathing in their direction sometimes. But the trick is just kind of not care really. And also remember, the pickup artist community and just the general manosphere is mostly correct about self-improvement. Improve your wardrobe, improve your hygiene, and hit the gym, and just focus on that basic level of self-maxing for about 6 months or so, and you'll just see some natural improvements. In fact, when you get attractive enough, women actually just kind of come up to you. Things kind of get exponentially easier the closer you get to the top. Next question. What are your awesome hoppy and libertarian living in Oregon thoughts on the Northwest Territorial Imperative Northwest Front? It'd be interesting if you can do a video about that, or just a QA video. I actually already have. If you look at my videos in the past, I do some blog rant videos, as I call them, where I kind of explain what it's like to be lib-right in Portland, Oregon area. I have not done any recently because, again, as I kind of mentioned, I came down with a really irritating chronic illness, and it makes it so I don't really go outside as much these days. So I actually just don't interact with downtown Portland that much anymore. Next question, and in fact, looking at the time, this will be the last question. From Beep Beep Imadragon 8758. If misandry is acceptable, then why can't other istophobias be? The left discredits itself with its hypocritical double standards. Yes, that is a point that I have been making in a lot of my videos. When historians, specifically historians who have a decent head on their shoulders in regards to philosophy and understanding cause and effect, when they look back on these times, I suspect that id pull for we but not for thee will probably be seen as the biggest brain rot of our day. The idea that you can have identity politics for your preferred collective group, but then try to socially shame and gaslight other collective groups into not engaging in their own collectivism and own identity, it's just so obviously ridiculous when you understand it from any kind of principled standpoint. It is a very easily identifiable grift, and it's honestly kind of surprising that the establishment has been able to keep it up as long as they have. And I think I'll just leave it at that. That is all for now. I'll be doing more QA in the next quarter for this year. Remember, just asking a question to one of my videos as a public subscriber has a chance of showing up in one of these videos. But yep, that is it. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, share, comment, subscribe. And if you want to support me, you can do find Ko-Fi, Subscribestar by buying some merch, which again, I'm putting the Taxationist Theft Hat on sale. Thanks again. That is all. Till next time.